Try to do this without butchering my own English here. But good afternoon. We got a busy few days ahead of us here on the foreign policy front, and if you'll just bear with me, I'll give you an overview. This weekend, as Corrine noted, in Wilmington, Delaware, the President will host the leaders of Japan, Australia, and India for the 4th Annual Quad Leaders Summit. Now, over the last 3+ years, President Biden has made it a priority to invest in rebuilding our network of alliances and partnerships across the Indo-Pacific. And in the process of doing that, he has strengthened not only existing relationships, but he's helped forge new ones altogether. So think about AUKUS, for instance, or the trilateral Camp David Summit with Japan and South Korea, or the first ever US-Japan-Philippines Leaders Summit in April, and of course, the Indo-Pacific Quad. Back in 2021, President Biden elevated the Quad to the leader level for precisely those reasons. He understood that bringing 4 leading Indo-Pacific democracies with shared priorities, mutual security interests, and strong bonds of friendship between our peoples, would make for a safer and more prosperous region, and quite frankly, a safer and more prosperous United States. Now, this particular Quad Summit will be the first time we've hosted foreign leaders in Wilmington, the President's hometown. And he's very excited about that, about showing them a place and a community that shaped so much of the public servant and the leader that he became. It's also a reflection of his belief that, like politics, foreign policy is also personal. And the President is enormously proud of the personal relationships that he has with each of these 4 leaders, or these 3 leaders, sorry. Indian Prime Minister Modi, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, and Australian Prime Minister Albanese. The President will meet individually with each of them, and they will also gather together in a larger plenary session where they will discuss expanding cooperation across a range of critically important issues. We believe that you'll see coming out of this summit that the Quad is more strategically aligned and more relevant than ever before. I think you can expect a robust agenda aimed at delivering concrete benefits to the people of the region as they all identify priorities such as health security, natural disaster response, maritime security, quality infrastructure, critical and emerging technologies, climate and clean energy, and cybersecurity. You'll also see some announcements that demonstrate our intention to make sure that this special partnership, the Quad, endures and in fact thrives over the long term. We'll have more details, of course, to share on the specific deliverables as we get a little closer to the weekend. Looking ahead to next week, on Monday, the 23rd of September, President Biden will welcome the President of the United Arab Emirates, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, to the White House. Now, this will be the first ever visit by a president of the UAE to Washington, so it's a historic one. The Vice President will also meet separately with President Mohammed. Both the President and the Vice President have spoken with or met with President Mohammed at multiple points throughout the administration, and we look forward to the opportunity to have face-to-face discussions here. In particular, the President and the Vice President will discuss a number of bilateral and regional matters together with areas of deepening cooperation in advanced technology, clean energy, space, supply chain resiliency, and critical infrastructure investments. The UAE has made a number of recent announcements with respect to strategic investments in climate and clean energy, all of which build on the Partnership to Accelerate Transition to Clean Energy, or otherwise known as PACE, which we signed with the UAE 2 years ago. We look forward to expanding this collaboration over the coming months and years. UAE is also, we might add, a leading partner in the President's Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investments. Advanced technology, I think, will also be a focus of this discussion, including efforts to advance responsible artificial intelligence goals. Now, in the region, President Biden and Vice President Harris will discuss with President Mohammed, obviously, the crisis in Gaza, UAE's essential role in addressing the humanitarian crisis there, and the crisis in Sudan, where, as the President's statement made clear last night, we all must increase efforts to open routes for humanitarian assistance and ultimately to secure a ceasefire. The President and the Vice President look forward to this important engagement with a strategic partner at a very important time. And then finally, the President, as you know, will be traveling to New York City on Monday afternoon for the 79th meeting of the UN General Assembly. Throughout all his engagements up there in New York, he will reaffirm America's leadership on the world stage. He'll rally global action to tackle the world's most pressing challenges, including climate, the opioid epidemic, mobilizing resources for developing countries, managing the risks and benefits of artificial intelligence, and helping end the brutal wars in Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan, among many other critically important issues. Specifically, on Tuesday morning, The President will deliver an address to the UN General Assembly outlining his vision for how the world should come together to solve these big problems and defend fundamental principles such as the UN Charter. The President will also meet with UN Secretary General Guterres and talk about how the partnership between the United States and the United Nations in advancing peace and safeguarding human rights can endure and to prosper. On Tuesday afternoon, the President will host a summit of the Global Coalition to address synthetic drug threats. We established this coalition ourselves just last year to drive international action in order to disrupt the global supply chain of illicit fentanyl and other synthetic drugs. This event will be an opportunity for leaders to drive progress on one of the most lethal global health and safety challenges of our lives. The meeting reflects the President's vision of countries working together to deal with problems that cross borders. Now, in this case, the coalition is playing a vital role helping our country deal with the fentanyl crisis here at home. The President will also have engagements with foreign leaders on Wednesday, and we'll have more to share on that agenda as we get a little closer. Thank you. Appreciate your patience.
Admiral, what's the White House response to the exploding walkie-talkies in Lebanon today? I know Karine addressed the pagers yesterday, but what's the latest U.S. assessment, and does the U.S. consider this a justifiable escalation?
What I can tell you is we were not involved in yesterday's incidents or today's in any way, and I don't have anything more to share.
Has the Israelis let you know about these operations?
I don't have anything more to share today.
Confirm that it's the U.S. assessment that the Israelis were behind all this.
Nothing more to share.
The Israeli defense minister said today that this is a new era of the war. What's the White House's response to that, and how concerned are you that this will cause this escalation?
All I'll say is that we want to see the war end. And everything we've been doing since the beginning has been designed to prevent the conflict from escalating. We still believe, for instance, that there is a diplomatic path forward, that particularly up near Lebanon. And we still believe that while it is increasingly difficult and we are certainly no closer to finality, that we believe a ceasefire deal and a negotiation to get the hostages out is still the best outcome, and we're going to keep pursuing that.
But how do these events move forward any diplomatic solution here?
It's difficult for me to stand up here, Gabe, and tell you exactly how incidents over the last couple of days are going to affect outcomes in the next few days. All I can tell you is we're still putting our shoulder to the wheel to get the hostages home and get a ceasefire in place, as daunting as that is today. And we are still involved in intensive diplomacy to try to prevent a second front from opening up on that border with Lebanon.
Thank you. Given the rhetoric and the attacks in the last few days, it seems like a full-out conflict is inevitable at this point. Would you agree with that assessment? And is the U.S. government preparing for an evacuation of American citizens in Lebanon and or in Israel in that case?
I think we've learned through experience, particularly over now what's going on almost a year here, that nothing is inevitable when it comes to that particular part of the world and this particular conflict. And we're going to, as I said to Gabe, we're going to do everything we can to see if we can end it and get those hostages home. And your second question was evacuation. I don't have anything with respect to evacuation preparations to talk about. I mean, that's a better question really put to the State Department. I think you know, Laura, as particularly from covering the Pentagon, we have on the shelf, we have evacuation plans available for places all over the world. But I wouldn't lead that to believe that we're in a moment now where we think we need to imminently call for that or act on that right now.
What has been the impact of the latest attacks on the potential for a ceasefire deal in Gaza?
I think it's too soon to know if what happened over the last couple of days is going to have any effect on where we are with a ceasefire deal. Sadly, we aren't any closer to that now than we were even a week ago. So it's difficult to see any immediate impact of these incidents, but I think it's just too soon to know in general.
Officials have said we're 90% there. Is that still the case?
I think in terms of the agreed framework and the language, that's still the case. The framework has been agreed to. The major architecture of the deal had been agreed to by both sides. But as we said, once you get down to niddling over that last 10%, and you're in that kind of horse trading, it gets real hard, and the details get real specific, and that's where we have run into some resistance, and we're not any closer today than we were a few days ago.
Thanks. CBS News, at least, has learned that the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, spoke yesterday with the Israeli Defense Minister 2 different times. We've been told no specifics were given about the operation that happened yesterday. Was there any heads up given yesterday that there would be more attacks in Lebanon today?
Well, I'd refer you to the Defense Department to speak to conversations that the Secretary had with Minister Gallant. As I said, there was no U.S. involvement in either of these incidents, and I have nothing.
One thing, though, but awareness it was coming is another.
I recognize the question. I have nothing more to add.
If you're someone who owns a pager like this that's been blown up in Lebanon in recent days, whether it was made by the Taiwanese company or the Hungarian company that may have had a licensing deal with them, should you be concerned it could blow up?
Again, Ed, I have nothing more to add on this.
Yeah. Our sources have confirmed to us it's been widely reported that Israel is responsible for this, but notably you still won't say that. Why is that? Is it because that's not your assessment or because you don't support what they're doing here?
It's because I don't have anything more to add on this issue. As I said, there was no U.S. involvement, and I'm not going to go beyond that today.
Then let me ask this. These kinds of tactics, blowing up pagers and walkie-talkies, is this type of warfare acceptable to the United States?
Again, Mary, I appreciate the question. I'm simply not going to be able to address these incidents over the last couple of days in any level of detail one way or another.
Okay, let me try one other thing.
Please.
You know, everyone keeps urging, all parties involved not to escalate this. Isn't this an escalation already? I mean, isn't this Israel doing exactly what you've been warning them not to do?
Again, I'm not going to speak to the details of these incidents. I understand that's frustrating. I get it. And I understand where all your questions are coming from. They're all valid. They're all fair. I'm just not going to get into this. I will add, if I could, and restate a little bit to what I said to Gabe. We still don't want to see an escalation of any kind. We don't believe that the way to solve where we're at in this crisis is by additional military operations at all. We still believe that the best way to prevent escalation, to prevent another front from opening up in Lebanon, is through diplomacy, which is why Mr. Hochstein was over in the region this week. And we're still going to pursue those kinds of outcomes.
If a state actor was involved in any way in what took place in Lebanon, is that acceptable behavior by a government?
Look, that's a great hypothetical, Trevor, that I'm simply not going to engage.
So it's not that's not the case, that it was a state actor?
I have nothing more to add on these incidents. I understand the question. I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals or speculate about what did or didn't happen or who might be responsible.
Is there any current intelligence assessment as to who was responsible?
I'm not going to get into intelligence estimates and assessments from here either.
Secretary of State Blinken expressed frustration at the escalations and remarks earlier today, saying it threatens to slow it, to stop a ceasefire deal. Is that the White House's assessment as well, that it's close to being stopped or derailed, or?
Look, as I said earlier, I think looking at the last couple of days, it's just a little too soon to know what kind of impact those incidents are going to have in the region writ large, particularly when it comes to the tensions up at the border with Lebanon. On the ceasefire deal and trying to get both sides back to the table, we're still working at that. Nothing's changed. We're still trying to get that done. We understand that even before the incidents of the last couple of days, doing that was real hard, that there wasn't a lot of momentum to be had there or inertia. We recognize that, but we're still working to try to see if we can get that done, because we still believe the best way to get those hostages home is through a negotiated arrangement. On the tensions with Lebanon, again, too soon to know what these incidents are going to mean to the already high tensions between Israel and Hezbollah up at that border, the blue line specifically. All I can tell you is even as recently as a couple of days ago, Amos Hochstein, our envoy, was in the region having discussions to do everything we can from a diplomatic perspective to prevent those tensions from escalating into all-out conflict.
One more just on Wilmington this weekend. Does the president intend to press Prime Minister Modi on human rights abuses while they're talking, one-on-one?
There's not a conversation that he has with foreign leaders where he doesn't talk about the importance of respecting human and civil rights, and that includes with Prime Minister Modi. He did when the Prime Minister was here in the United States, and I'm sure that as appropriate he'll do going forward. I'm not going to get ahead of the conversation, but he never shies away from talking about our concerns over human and civil rights anywhere in the world.
Thanks. Amir, you said a lot of time, especially about this region, that it's very important for this administration that the rules of war or international humanitarian law is being followed. So why won't you make an assessment whether these operations that we are seeing in Lebanon indeed are in accordance with international humanitarian law?
You know, I can appreciate that y'all want answers to these questions, and you want them now. I get that. We're talking about incidents that allegedly happened today, apparently happened today, and some that happened yesterday. I'm just not going to get into intelligence assessments one way or another about this. And I would also add that, as we have said from the very beginning, Israel has a right to defend itself. How they do so matters to us, and we don't shy away from having those kinds of conversations with the Israelis as appropriate.
So you're saying Israel is behind these operations?
I did not say that.
Do you think that Israel, whoever committed this attack, is undermining U.S. efforts at avoiding an escalation in the region? And if so, what is the next move to try and prevent that from happening?
We're going to keep at the work of intense diplomacy to see what we can do to de-escalate, to try to prevent this from becoming a bigger conflict than it already has.
One more. Over the weekend, the Palestinian ministry in Gaza submitted a report with the names, IDs, ages of 34,000 people who've been killed since October 7. Over 7,000 more whose identities have not been verified. The first 14 pages of the report are of babies under the age of 1, and 2 people over the age of 100. Has the White House seen that report, and do you have any comments beyond far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed in this conflict?
Let me take the question for you so I can get you back a good substantive answer. I don't know if we've seen that report. I haven't, but that doesn't mean that somebody here hasn't, so why don't you let me take that back and get you a better answer.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
On U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel, the CFIUS review that's now been, I guess, delayed or extended another 90 days, can you explain a little bit why that process is taking so long, and if it signals any sort of shift in the president's thinking about concerns he's expressed about this merger?
CFIUS runs an independent process. As far as I know, there's been no delay or extension. That process is ongoing, as I understand that to be the case. Look, the president has said already what he believes that the future of U.S. Steel ought to be. He's made that clear, but he also respects the CFIUS process. And again, that process is ongoing.
Thanks, Corinne. John, to what extent will China be a focus of the Quad meeting this weekend?
Well, I think it'll certainly be high on the agenda, John. I mean, there's not an opportunity when you get together with these particular leaders, the Indo-Pacific Quad, where in fact, it would be irresponsible if they didn't talk about the challenges that still exist in the region caused by aggressive PRC military action, for instance, unfair trade practices, tensions over the Taiwan Strait. I have no doubt that all those issues will come up.
Do all 4 Quad countries view China as a threat to the Indo-Pacific region?
I think you'd have to talk to the leaders about their particular view of the PRC, but I think we all have a common set of understanding about the challenges that the PRC is posing. But each of them, they're sovereign countries. They get to decide for themselves what their relationship is going to be with the PRC and how that looks. Each of them has a different relationship with the PRC, including us.
Thank you, Corinne. Admiral, there's been a decided shift in confidence among U.S. officials about the ability to reach a ceasefire deal in the near term. And today, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is meeting with hostage families again, and I'm wondering what the administration's message is to them.
Well, number one, that we haven't forgotten their loved ones. Number two, that we're going to do everything we can to get them home where they belong, back with their families. And number three, that even though we haven't found purchase here with this deal, we're not going to stop trying. That we're still working very hard every day. I mean, I had a chance to talk to Brett McGurk earlier today. I can assure you, he's still working to see what we can do to try to move this forward. It doesn't appear right now, and I don't want to get ahead of Jake or speak for him, but I would imagine that he'll also convey to them, and it doesn't appear that Mr. Sinwar is serious at all about moving this forward and coming to closure on it. But it doesn't mean we're giving up on it.
And then in the events in the region more broadly, given what happened in Lebanon, in previous instances where there's been the possibility of wider escalation, we've seen the U.S. move military assets, vessels, aircraft in the region. Is there any of that going on right now?
We have a robust presence in the Middle East right now and have sustained that, as you know, over the last few weeks when there was concern about escalation. What I can tell you is that force posture is still there, still robust. We look at it every single day as against the threat, and we make adjustments as we need to. Not all those adjustments make headlines, or do we announce them for understandable reasons, but the President is confident that we maintain sufficient military capability in the region to defend our interest and, of course, our allies and partners as appropriate.
And just quickly, if I may, on that, last year the President's message was largely about Ukraine and the need for more funding for Ukraine's defenses. October 7th happened just a couple weeks later. How much will that figure prominently in the President's events next week?
Well, without getting too far ahead of the President's speech, I think you can expect him to talk about the modern crises that we're facing right now. Certainly Ukraine and Gaza are two of the chief ones there, and how American leadership matters, how coalition building matters and has made a difference in both conflicts, and how we have to stay at that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. John, next week President Zelensky of Ukraine will present his victory plan to President Biden. Has the President had a chance to review this plan, and would you call it victorious?
We've not been fully briefed on it.
Will President Biden host President Zelensky in New York or here at the White House?
I don't have a meeting to announce today, but stay tuned.
Ukrainians have requested a meeting, according to our sources, with Vice President Harris. Did she accept this
I would refer to Vice President Harris's staff. You know, she has met with President Zelensky face-to-face on a couple of occasions, and I know she's spoken to him on the phone. I have little doubt that if the opportunity presents itself and both of them can have another conversation, they will, but you'd have to talk to her staff on
Getting back to Lebanon, so those communication devices were reportedly made in Japan and Taiwan. Have you reached out to your Japanese and Taiwanese counterparts in that matter?
I'm aware of no such communication.
Thank you, Corinne. Admiral, staying on the subject of Russia, the government of Armenia today said that they formally plot Russian forces to try to stage a coup in their country. Is the White House aware of this and have any comment?
I won't get into intelligence assessments specifically, Jonathan. I would just say writ large, and we've talked about this before, Russia has proven adept and certainly interested in interfering in democratic institutions around the world, certainly here at home, no question about it, but overseas as well. It is a constant topic of conversation between us and our allies and our partners, and we're doing everything we can working with them to try to disrupt that interference.
Thank you so much.
John, can you address the famine in Sudan, John? Can you address the famine, please?
I think if I could just briefly point you to the President's statement last night.
How serious is it? How dire is it?
I don't know of a famine that's not dire. Right. It's dire.
Millions
of people have been pushed out of their homes. Hundreds of thousands of them are facing incredibly violent circumstances. And yes, there's real famine and real hunger. And that's why we are working incredibly hard. And that's why the President himself wanted to make that point about last night about that town Al-Fashir and the RSF's basically siege of it. It's got to stop. Both sides have got to start coming together, sitting at the table and doing what's right by the Sudanese people. And I'll tell you something else. He's not going to stop fighting for the people of Sudan. We're not going to stop trying to find a way to end this conflict.
The President has